Hello and welcome to an interactive demo of Sophos UTM on Amazon's elastic computing architecture. Today we are going to talk about how to access resources you have within Amazon's cloud using your on-premise UTM to seamlessly connect. My name is Angelo Comazzetto. I work here at Sophos and I'll be taking you through the demo for today. Let's have a look at some slides. The first thing we want to talk about is take you very quickly through Amazon VPC. We've covered VPC in lots of our videos in much more detail, so today will not be a dedicated VPC training, but we will set everything up from scratch, so you don't have to watch the other videos in order to accomplish this goal. Now, Amazon VPC is a great way to carve out your own piece of Amazon's cloud, all for your use. It's basically a bring your own network. You can also have multiple subnets. Inside VPC, you can have public subnets that connect to the internet, and private subnets that actually just remain private. You can also set up things in the middle of those subnets, such as your own Sophos UTM. Again, we cover that in a separate video. For today, we want to talk about the different types of things you can do in VPC and how you can connect your on-premise UTM to those resources. Now, Amazon has different types of gateways. They have virtual private gateways, which give you a back-end connection into your own private subnet. And they also have internet gateways, which connect you directly to the internet. We're going to deal today mostly with the virtual private gateways themselves. And when you look at how to architect something like that, what we want is we want to take a UTM that we have sitting at our location at the customer network, and we want to securely link it to the private side of our VPC. We could create port forwarding rules in Amazon firewalls, run our own UTM in the public side of Amazon VPC and forward through that, or we can connect directly to the back end via a secure encrypted link using a VPN tunnel. This allows us to extend our customer network into Amazon's cloud and have resources like file servers sitting on their robust and very speedy architecture, but we can connect to them as if they were local in the back IT room. Now, when designing this type, there are lots of different options available. If you use an internet gateway, the public side will get an elastic IP and will connect directly to the internet. And from there, I have to come in to the elastic IP using traditional techniques of port forwarding and coming over the public interface to reach the private network behind. We want to talk about how to do that with the virtual private gateway instead. When we're finished today, we'll have something more like this. We'll be able to talk directly to the back-end servers. You can see those little black lines here on the slide, and those will allow us to talk directly into our customer network via the VPC connector. This way, all of that stuff will look as if it's completely private. When you set up VPC, you have a lot of different options, like if you would like to have public subnets and private subnets. Would you like to enable this back-end VPN connector or not? And would you like to have maybe a public subnet only or a private subnet only? All of them have lots of different use cases depending on the networks that you're deploying them in for the real world. However, the one we're going to do today is, again, looking at how to connect to the private side using your UTM. It is actually a very good use case because, hey, somebody like NASA, they make it work for them to host pictures, access secure servers, and basically rely on VPC for a lot of their secure encrypted communications and storage. So if it works for them, it probably will work for us. But we're also going to get a little bit more fancy, because rather than just make a single IPsec VPN tunnel like many of our competitors can do, we're going to show you how to create dual redundant tunnels that use BGP routing and give you 2 points of entry into the backend data center in your VPC. The reason we want to do this, we want to add a little bit of redundancy. Amazon supports that, and we're going to show you how to set that particular scenario up with your UTM. So for today, we have a UTM on site at the customer network. We're going to create a VPC that has a private subnet that we can connect to, and we're going to use the Sophos UTM Amazon VPC connector to easily link our local subnets with the remote subnets in VPC. We're going to do all of that mostly live. The first thing we need to do is log into our Amazon console. And again, it's very easy to get sidetracked and talk all sorts of things about all of the features they have and all of the things we can do. Keep in mind, this is not the only video we have about Sophos UTM and Amazon's elastic computing cloud. The first thing we need to do is we need to actually build a VPC. We'll do that by selecting VPC from the top and then clicking the Get Started Creating a VPC button. If we choose VPC with a single public subnet, we're going to get just one network. It will be flat, and it's basically like our own private place where we can launch EC2 style instances. We don't want to use that today. We can also create a VPC that has public and private subnets, and that will give us an Amazon NAT router in between them, that allows us to control access between the public subnet, where we can attach an elastic IP, to the back-end private subnet, which usually doesn't have internet access unless you want to create tunnels through your NAT instance here. Now we want to do something a lot more fancy, is we want to have a VPC with public and private subnets and hardware VPN. This allows us, if we want later, to create public-facing machines and have elastic IPs, and doesn't limit us that way, but also creates a private subnet and gives us a back-end VPN connection that we'll establish using our UTM VPC connector. If you have no need whatsoever for public internet access at your remote machines and simply want to have a nice bastion of secure, scalable storage that you can use to host resources, you can choose VPC with a private subnet only and hardware VPN access. This means that those remote machines will not be able to access the internet through Amazon's public internet connection, but they could, over your VPN connection, gate out your local UTM if you want. We'll stick with option number 3 today. Now we have to tell it a little bit about our local machine that we have here at the customer site. Now, because Amazon does not yet support hostname-based VPN tunnels, we have to tell it what IP address we have. So we're going to pick my IP address here, which is 96.50.240.11. And now we have 2 choices. The default is a very plain, very simple, statically routed, single IP set connection. It's supported by many of our competitors, but also the configuration download for that isn't really an automatic configuration, but more of a text file that tells you all of the dozens of things you need to do to create a VPN tunnel into your VPC. We support that, but we want to do something even more extravagant and a lot more robust, but we're going to do it at just a fraction of the complexity. We're going to choose the dynamic routing option, which uses BGP. What we're going to do is then hit continue, and now we have to set up our VPC IP space, or the networking. So I'm just going to create a few different networks here that are a bit smaller than the big 16 network they give us. Let's use 192.168.80.0/22. And then we're going to say, that'll give us a few 4 or so networks to play with. We'll make a public side, which is 192.168.80.0/24. And we're going to make a private one, which is 192.168.81.0/24. Now this is where we're going to run into our first problem if you're not paying attention. When we have 2 subnets like this, Amazon defaults to using the no preference option for the availability zone. You need to select the same availability zone for both, otherwise you leave it up to the random chance that you won't have both subnets assigned to the same AZ. This isn't a problem when you're only using one network per instance that you launch in Amazon's VPC, but if you later want to launch something like a Sophos UTM that plugs into both subnets, you won't be able to do that unless they're both in the same availability zone. And it's not possible to change them later. So just to be safe, assign both of your subnets to the same availability zone so you have options later on. Everything else here looks okay, so if we've done it right, we should just click Create VPC, and it will launch very, very quickly as all of the automated processes in Amazon's cloud go ahead and do exactly what we need to have a working VPC, sets up the hardware VPN side of things, and in just a few moments this will be finished. As it's finishing up, I'll just quickly mention that the first thing we're going to do is launch a Windows server into the private side of our VPC, and then we're going to configure the rest of the UTM tunnel. The reason I'm going to launch the Windows machine first is that it takes sometimes between 10 and 15 minutes before it's actually available and something that we can log into. Only for Windows it has to generate a key. We have to use that key to log into it with Remote Desktop later. And because that takes a little bit using Amazon's solution, we're going to do that first, which is a little bit out of order with how you might normally do it, in establishing the connection first and then launching machines that you want to reach. So in just a second this will finish, and at that point we'll be able to download our VPN configuration so we can use it later for the Sophos UTM VPC connector. And after just a few more seconds, we now see that our VPC is created. We have the option now to download the configuration, or we can do it later. We're going to download it now, and I'll make a few notes along the way. To download is quite simple. All we need to do is pick our vendor from the list. Let's find Sophos on here. And then we have to choose our platform. You'll notice UTM is available, as well as the old Astaro Security Gateway. They're actually identical. We just leave them like that so people can find the product that's most familiar to them if you happen to be building this with one of our older Astaro Security Gateway releases. Let's choose UTM, and then our software version is currently version 9. We'll choose that as well. And at that point, all we have to do is click download. What this will do is offer us the chance to save a file to our desktop, which has all of our configuration built in, and we can use that later to establish our VPN tunnel. I'm just going to quickly save that to my PC, and it's a little text file. We'll just save that. And we'll be able to use that in just a few minutes when we log into our UTM. We can see it's downloaded down here in the download bar of Chrome. Now, before we go set up our VPN connection, let's launch that Windows machine I was mentioning. We're going to flip over from VPC into EC2, and we're going to click Launch an Instance. Now, when we launch an instance, there's a few parameters we need to fill out. We'll use the classic wizard. We could do it all manually, but again, until you become an expert, it's a lot easier just to go through their system here. We'll scroll down a little bit. We're going to find a Windows instance. There's a Windows server. We'll select that one. We'll just launch a small instance because for the demo today, we don't need much more than that. And then we have to make sure that we launch our instance not into the classic EC2, but into our VPC. A lot of people miss this checkbox. So we're going to click that. And then we have to choose which subnet we want to launch it into. Well, we want it to be in our private subnet, which is the 81 network. When we're okay with that, we hit yes. And we have some other things that we can put in here. Because later I don't want to have to come and determine the IP address, I'm just going to take it off auto assign and I'll make it 192.168.81.15. And then I'll hit continue. I can also edit the hard drive here if I like, because for a Windows machine, 30 gigabytes isn't all that big. Let's just increase that to 60 quickly and hit save. And then we can click continue as well. I'm actually going to call this Windows Server, and I'll just put in brackets, I'll put private to remind me that it's in the private subnet. These are simply text tags, and you can add as many of them as you like, up to a maximum of 10, and they're used only for labeling and filtering. This is the important part. We need a key pair in order to successfully retrieve the administrator password of the instance once it's launched. If you have an existing one, you can choose that as long as you do have the private key on your local PC so that you can challenge it later. But because we don't today, let's just call this my VPC key. When that's okay, we'll just download that. Just takes a second, we'll save that as well. And that's been downloaded and saved, and we'll use that in a few minutes. Now we have the chance to choose a security group. For today, in order to ensure this doesn't impede us in any way and get into a lot of different rules that we need to make to open up all the ports we need, I'm just going to call this fully open, and I'm going to make one for all traffic. So I'm going to find that here it says all traffic, which is all ports, all protocols. I'll add that to the list. I'll delete the existing one that they give us just for port 3389. And from there, everything looks good. I'll hit continue. So as we can see, we have a Windows ALMI about to launch. It's going to be it's going to launch in US West. We have some different options here for where it's going to, how it's going to be configured and the IP addresses. When we're happy with that, we just hit launch, and this will then come up. It'll take a little while before we can actually access the instance. And so while this is booting, we'll move over into our UTM and we'll connect the VPN tunnel. Let me just switch back to VPC here, and we'll have this ready for us. We'll scroll down a little bit to where it says VPN connections, and you can see that we have a VPN connection, but it shows as red because of course we haven't yet connected to it. So let's go ahead and log into a UTM here, which I've already got available, and we'll go down into the site-to-site VPN and select Amazon VPC. From here, we can look at the Amazon Virtual Private Cloud Connector. Setting it up is really easy. If we click the Setup tab, you'll notice that there is no very fancy parameters of IPsec strength, BGP routing. All of the things that you would need to do by hand manually, we have automated completely for you. And that's kind of the genius around our VPC connector. If you want, you could join your UTM directly to Amazon using your credentials that you have from them, but we'll use our VPC configuration file instead. So I'm just going to click the Browse button and then click Choose File, and then we'll have a chance to have a look for it. I'll select the file that we downloaded, which we called My VPN Configuration, and hit Open. And then I'll just click Start Upload, and that'll launch it in here into my UTM. Now, if you have chosen the static connection, the single connection, you would have to enter the remote network here so the VPN tunnel could be successfully created. Because we have chosen the more advanced dual IPsec VPN tunnel with BGP routing, we don't need to do that. Everything that we need is included in the configuration file, and you don't have to know a single thing about VPN tunnels, BGP routing, or all of the individual parameters involved in setting that up. All you need to do is find your file and click Apply. Once that's good, it'll show you that it was successful. If we come here to the status page, if we wait just a minute, this will actually start to build itself. And so now it's going to contact our Amazon VPC. It's going to create dual redundant tunnels from our UTM here to their double gateways that they have on their side. It's going to do that and configure an IPsec tunnel for us. And it's going to set up BGP routing, so we not only have balancing across the tunnel, but we have instant failover if something happens to go wrong on Amazon's side. If we click Reload, This shouldn't actually take too much longer, and there it is. Both tunnels are up. We have 2 tunnels going to 2 different Amazon gateways, .121 and .122, and everything is ready to go. We didn't have to know anything about how to set that up. It all works just magically. If we come back over here to the VPC management console, we can actually just wait just a minute and click the relaunch button, and we can see that this tunnel is now up and we are now connected. This means in my local space where I'm sitting in my customer site, which is using 192.168.50.0, I'll be able to see 192.168.81.0/24 as if it was local to me. Basically, my data center has just now been brought right into my local network via my UTM connector. Let's see if our Windows machine is up and running, and then we can run some tests and remote desktop to it. I'll click on EC2, have a look at my Windows instance here by clicking on Instances, and it's going to take a few minutes for this instance to actually be available to get its admin password. So if I right-click it and I want to log into it with my remote desktop and I say, give me my Windows password, it's going to say I'm still generating the password. So we have to wait 15 minutes before we can get the password itself. But that doesn't mean it's not up network-wise, so we might be able to ping it. Now that our tunnel is actually up, we can do a simple ping test just to make sure that it's actually responding. Because we're at the customer site, we should be able to see the remote IP space on the private side of the VPC as if we were local in the office. So let's just ping the private IP of 192.168.81.15, and you can see that responds just fine. We also want to remote desktop to it to finish the demo, so let's close this, right-click and retrieve our Windows password, and all we need to do is we need to find that key file that we downloaded earlier in the demo called myvpckey.pem. If we then decrypt the password, we'll be able to have a copy and paste here. We can then open up a remote desktop window. Let's go ahead and type that in. So we're going to need to go to 192.168.81.15, and we'll hit connect, and if we've done everything right, it should respond. We'll use administrator. We'll paste in that password, and we'll hit OK. Now you can see, I'll just move this over here, that we have connected to our Windows hosted instance on the private side of a VPC using our Sophos UTM VPC connector, which has allowed us to establish dual IPsec VPN tunnels with BGP routing, all in just a few clicks. If you remove all of the explanations from this video and just logged into your VPC, downloaded the VPN configuration, and uploaded it into the UTM, which as you saw only took a few seconds, this isn't that hard to set up and gives you a very powerful way to connect your local on-premise equipment into a VPC data center that you own and control yourself at a fraction of the cost of what it might cost to build it or host it all yourself. I hope that's been educational, and be sure to look at other videos we have around Sophos UTM and Amazon's Elastic Computing Cloud.